Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 14 waiver wire pickups for the 2025 fantasy football season, talking about the best available pickups at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, kicker, and defensive positions, not only for Week 14, as many of us have to navigate the upcoming injuries and, of course, bye weeks. This is the final week of bye weeks with New England, Carolina, San Francisco, and the New York Giants out. But, of course, pick up players that could hopefully help us capture a 2025 fantasy football championship as we approach the upcoming playoffs, weeks 15 through 17. Therefore, we'll talk about players at a variety of different positions who are currently all rostered in less than 50% of sleeper leagues in order to give ourselves the best opportunity of picking up these studs and setting our lineups in the correct direction. So without further ado, let's begin by talking about the running back conversation. Again, reminder, there are timestamps down below, so if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific position or player, travel down there. And while you're down there, if you have not yet already, of course, help us get one step closer to achieving our goal this season of 100,000 subscribers by subscribing today. Thank you very much. All right, let's begin with the running back conversation with Chris Rodriguez Jr. We've mentioned him for the last 5 consecutive weeks here. He has scored a rushing touchdown in 4 of the last 6 games. And with Jayden Daniels expected to return in the not so distant future, whether it's this upcoming week or future weeks, it's only going to help the likelihood of Chris Rodriguez finding success within fantasy. Coming off a performance of 41 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown last night against the Denver Broncos defense, but the upcoming schedule ahead for the Washington Commanders run game is going to be far more advantageous, taking on Minnesota, the New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles, and Dallas Cowboys. And with the likes of Jayden Daniels under center, there's even a higher likelihood of this offense finding more elevations of success and finding Chris Rodriguez within those opportunities getting into the end zone. Currently only rostered in 42% of leagues. If you haven't done so yet already and he is somehow still available, could very easily be a 10+ point player every single week henceforth because of the upcoming schedule. Then we look towards a player like Bam Knight, who we've talked about over the course of the last month as well, considering he has been the clear and away RB1 with Emari Demercado dealing with injury. And in this most recent week, even though Trey Benson practiced on Wednesday, his Thursday and Friday designations did not participate. Therefore, in his absence, Bam Knight was stepping up to the task on hand. And over the course of the last 3 weeks, in the absence of Emari Demercado and effectively Trey Benson, putting up 12.5, 11.2, and in this most recent game, 15.3 fantasy points. He had himself a total of 98 yards, 3 receptions, 1 receiving touchdown. Again, another incredible week. And in the last 3 games, scoring 1 touchdown minimum, even up against the LA Rams. I'm not worried about it. The Rams in this most recent week, of course, against Carolina, were allowing a lot on the ground through the air. Didn't really matter. Ultimately, if in fact Trey Benson's going to miss another consecutive game, considering he missed both Thursday and Friday's practice of last week, Bam Knight certainly a value, rostered in 41% of sleeper formats. Now, as Bam Knight has scored touchdowns, hopefully later tonight when we talk about the New England Patriots and, of course, New York Giants taking on each other, we're looking for a lot of touchdowns. And in that case, do not forget, after tonight's game, I'll be live streaming here on the channel, so if you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. But, of course, I'll be putting together a couple plays via Betr at the end of today's episode in regards to this Monday night matchup. So for those of you who are trying to put together your own plays, travel down to the description of the video and check out Betr, as I'm partnering with them for the entirety of the season, not only to provide plays, but also Sunday morning rankings every single week for the remainder of the season. If you sign up today using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of 10 and make a first time play within a real cash play, you'll be eligible to not only get the free $10, but also put together your own plays and get those rankings sent from my email directly to yours. So be sure to take advantage of the opportunity. Check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility, and check out the plays that I'm putting together at the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, let's continue on with the running back conversation with Bhayshul Tuten. Look, the fact of the matter is he is still getting a solid volume of touches. He's just been incredibly inefficient, and as long as that's going to continue to be the case, he'll be a value point, but he's a handcuff with upside. In a desperate situation, could be flex started in a good matchup, but ultimately he is purely just a handcuff that is stealing occasional goal line touches, which of course does present value. And for those of us who are in fantasy leagues in which we can find players like this, a Bhayshul Tuten, a Tyler Algier, of course, we want them on roster, but of course, we also want players like Blake Corum, our number 4, who is very similar to Bhayshul Tuten in the idea that he's a handcuff with upside, but purely just a handcuff. Outside of this most recent game in which he scored 14.1 fantasy points, the 9 prior games consist of less than 6 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, Blake Corum is still in a way the number 2 running back of this offense, and it's not going to change anytime soon, unless, of course, the handcuff purposes of him playing because of a Kyren Williams injury was to occur. Nonetheless, again, we are rostering him purely because we are just trying to handcuff and have insurance policies to Kyren Williams going forward. Then we close out the running back conversation with Michael Carter. Like I mentioned with Bam Knight earlier, in the event in which Trey Benson is going to miss another consecutive game, considering the DNP designation on Thursday and Friday's practice that did not participate. In the event in which, of course, Trey Benson's out again, Michael Carter in the last 3 games in a full PPR scoring format. Again, I would think that he's a PPR merchant, especially considering the receiving utilization he has seen of late, taking on the LA Rams this week. He has put up 7.8, 8.8, and most recently 11.4 fantasy points out of the backfield for the Arizona Cardinals. A lot of value to be had in that circumstance. Now let's move on to the wide receiver conversation. Beginning with the thumbnail of today's episode, we have A.D. Mitchell, formerly of the Indianapolis Colts, recently traded in that overall move prior to the deadline for Sauce Gardner in the direction of the New York Jets. And now that he has found his footing within this offense, coming off of an incredible game of 20 fantasy points with Tyrod Taylor, but over the course of the last 2 weeks with Tyrod Taylor, 19 targets, it's a 31% target share, which is only going to continue to expand as we go forward. I understand there is a looming potential in which Garrett Wilson could return to this offense and take away the value for A.D. Mitchell, but in the meanwhile, as this team continues to see negative game scripts as an automatic going forward, taking on the Miami Dolphins this upcoming week, who have most recently given up 93 in a touchdown to Vele, 47 in a touchdown to Olave, 74 in a touchdown to Debo, and of course Keon Coleman even scored against this defense. Many of wide receivers have found success. Therefore, A.D. Mitchell, in the absence of a Garrett Wilson, as the clear and away number 1 target option of this offense via target share, is expected to continue a successful streak this upcoming week. Number 2, we have Isaac TeSlaa, who as of right now, in the absence of Amon-Ra St. Brown, would be the next man to step up. With no Amon-Ra St. Brown and no Sam Laporta, the expectation is that, yes, Jameson Williams is clear and away going to be the focal point of the passing game, but TeSlaa needs to step up in order to help this team find victories, especially going up against the Dallas Cowboys Thursday Night Football. Even though it is technically a short week, they played last Thursday, so they will have their 7-game stretch in order to prepare for this game. And in the event in which Amon-Ra St. Brown is inactive due to the ankle sprain, there is a possibility in which TeSlaa will be asked to do a lot, especially considering the Cowboys secondary is still a liability, whether it be Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Marquise Hollywood-Brown this most recent week, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown the week prior to that. Again, many of wide receivers have found success all season long, and TeSlaa could be the next in the upcoming matchup for Thursday night, only rostered in 5% of leagues. Again, a lot of the wide receivers I'm going to mention today are rostered in less than 10% of leagues on Sleeper. A.D. Mitchell was at 7%, and the new wide receiver I just popped up, Devaughn Vele, is 3% rostered, coming off of a game of 8 targets, 8 grabs, 93 in a touchdown. And post week 11 bye week, since they have gotten rid of Brandon Cooks, Devaughn Vele, 15 targets in the last 81 passing attempts, which is an 18.5% target share within this offense. And considering Chris Olave's most recent injury, in the event in which Chris Olave re-aggravates said back injury, there's a possibility in which going forward for the remainder of the season, if Olave is to sit out at any moment, Devaughn Vele would be clear and away the number 1 receiving option of this offense. We've seen back in 2024, as a member of the Denver Broncos, he got himself a good opportunity share and obviously was traded this offseason. But in the event in which we are given an opportunity for Vele to get more opportunity in negative game scripts this upcoming week, taking on Tampa Bay, which is an advantageous matchup for the wide receiver position, Tyler Shough is going to be throwing the ball for majority of the games. And of course, already has experience earlier this season back in week 8 in the second half taking on Tampa Bay. Should be able to have himself a lot of success with Vele in this circumstance. Then we move on to our number 4, Dontayvion Wicks. Look, in the event in which Jayden Reed is active, this would be a suggestion that we would just eliminate completely because Dontayvion Wicks is 100% dependent on getting the opportunities. And there are times every single year over the course of the last 3 seasons in which I remember Dontayvion Wicks coming out, putting up great performances like this, then disappearing subsequently after. So if Jayden Reed, who is currently rostered in 42% of sleeper leagues, if he's still available in your league, he would be the priority pickup. Otherwise, you look in the direction of Dontayvion Wicks, assuming Reed misses this week, because he's only rostered in 3% of leagues, coming off of a 25-point performance, in which, of course, he literally carried this team to a victory with 6 grabs, 94, and 2 touchdowns. Of course, if we're going to be in a situation in which Reed's back, Wicks disappears, ignore it. But otherwise, there's always a chance he could end up getting himself more utilization if the Packers finally start to lean into playing to their strengths, which oftentimes they try to play a very conservative offensive approach every time out. Then we move on to Greg Dortch. In this most recent game, Marvin Harrison Jr. did in fact return, but he also left early with a potential heel injury. As to how significant that injury is to be determined, but over the course of the 3 games this season in which Marvin Harrison Jr. has either outright missed or left early due to an injury, we have seen in a half PPR scoring format Greg Dortch produced 15.6, 13.8, and 8.4 fantasy points and a half PPR. Therefore, if we're going to be in a situation in which Marvin Harrison's going to miss any sort of semblance of time, Greg Dortch would be an automatic pickup and play, taking on the LA Rams this upcoming week within this Jacoby Brissett offense that's throwing the ball nearly 40 to 50 times per game on average as of late. Then we close out with Jalen Coker. I understand that the Carolina Panthers are going on bye, but over the course of the last 2 weeks, he's garnered a 20% target share within this offense, and in 2 of the last 3 games, Bryce Young looks like he's God's gift to football. And if there's going to be a situation in which this Carolina Panthers team gets hot late and takes on their upcoming schedule of matchups in which, again, they could end up finding themselves victorious in many of those games, Jalen Coker would be the expected potential step-up player, not someone like Xavier Legette, who over the course of the season, like we've mentioned, has been fool's gold on multiple occasions. Moving on to the tight end conversation. We have players that we've mentioned on multiple occasions over the course of this entire season. And once again, I'm mentioning Dalton Schultz only rostered in 47% of leagues. It should be more like 87% of leagues. But nonetheless, we're talking about Schultz, who has had 5 of the last 7 games consist of 8 or more targets and 6 or more receptions. Since week 7, he's the number 7 overall tight end in fantasy football. And he's number 3 amongst all tight ends in terms of total receptions this season. Must be rostered. Continue to go ahead and look in his direction if you need a tight end. Then we move on to Brenton Strange, who over the course of the last back-to-back 2 games has been a top 5 ranked tight end in a half PPR scoring format, and now has an opportunity of taking on the Colts, who just recently have given up 9 catches, 71 to Houston, 7 for 68 against Kansas City, 10 for 95 against Pittsburgh, and 6 for 76 against Tennessee. A couple touchdowns in those games, but ultimately they have given up their fair share of receptions and yards to opposing tight ends. And with Parker Washington most recently going down with injury, it provides even more potential opportunity for Brenton Strange. Then we have Theo Johnson, who prior to tonight's game, you can pick him up as they take on the New England Patriots. And I do believe he is a fantastic option in tonight's matchup. But besides that, when we talk about his overall utilization with Jackson Dart, since week 4, from weeks 4 through 10 with Jackson Dart under center, he was the number 2 receiving option of this offense while averaging 10 fantasy points per game at a half PPR. And when we look at the upcoming schedule, yes, he has an upcoming week 14 bye. But after that, they take on Washington, Minnesota, and Las Vegas, who are all advantageous matchups for the likes of someone like Theo Johnson, who gets himself as much opportunity as he does down in the red zone. Then we move on to Harold Fannin Jr. Over the course of the last 2 games with Shedeur Sanders, 6.4 and 9.8 fantasy points. This most recent week finding himself in the end zone, but 11 targets on the last 45 passing attempts is a 24.4% target share. As long as those opportunities continue to live in that overall realm, of course, Harold Fannin's still of value. And in this upcoming week, taking on Tennessee, who have recently allowed 4 for 59 in a touchdown against Jacksonville, 6 for 51 against Houston, and 6 for 80 against the Los Angeles Chargers. And with David Njoku dealing with his own injuries, not getting much opportunity share, it looks like the Harold Fannin show in Cleveland. Then we move on to Darren Waller. Look, the fact of the matter is, as per usual, he's gotten back to his normal role of running routes either out wide or in the slot. This most recent game, 75%, which earlier this season, it was more like 80% of his routes either out wide or in the slot. This week, they take on the Jets, who earlier this season, he went for 3 catches, 27, and 2 touchdowns for 16.2 fantasy points against. Recently, the New York Jets have allowed 7 for 82 against Atlanta, 4 for 45 against New England, 6 for 65 and a touchdown against Cleveland. And besides this upcoming week being a relatively advantageous position for the Dolphins offense, their upcoming schedule consists of Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Tampa Bay, who are all great for the tight end position. Moving on to the final option I wanted to mention, it's Isaiah Likely, rostered in 11% of leagues. Outside of that single fumble, could have easily scored 16 plus fantasy points in this most recent game, but still comes away with 5 catches for 95 yards in a great matchup against the Bengals, who in week 15 has an opportunity of getting redemption. This week, in the meanwhile, will take on Pittsburgh, who, yes, this season have been relatively rough in terms of stopping opposing tight ends. Cincinnati, 8 catches, 58. Chicago, 6 for 56 and a touchdown. And in this most recent week, in the absence of Kincaid, we still saw Buffalo with 4 catches and 38 receiving yards from their tight ends. Still a lot of possibility if Isaiah Likely's overall opportunity share continues to grow within this offense. Let's move on to the quarterback conversation, beginning with someone of the likes of Tyrod Taylor. I will say this is under the assumption that someone like Jayden Daniels, Jacoby Brissett, or Trevor Lawrence are not available in your league, and you're in need of filling in for the prospects of Drake May, Jackson Dart, or Brock Purdy. Therefore, you're looking in the direction of Tyrod Taylor, that is only rostered in 6% of leagues, coming off a performance in which he scored majority of his fantasy points with less than 2 minutes left on the clock in this game. Led this team to a victory and got himself a lot of rushing statistics in that final 2 minutes, in which he scored, of course, 10.4 fantasy points via rushing statistics isolated this most recent game, and in 2 of the last 3 starts has had 44 or more rushing yards. As long as the scrambling is continued to be implicated within his score lines, he is going to be relevant for fantasy purposes this week, taking on Miami, who have given up 18, 49, and 35 rushing yards to opposing quarterbacks in the last 3 games alone. Then we move on to our number 2. We have Tyler Shough, the rookie quarterback that's coming off of another solid game of 2 passing touchdowns. Again, they raged a comeback against the Dolphins, and even though they weren't able to find themselves victorious, he's showing signs of still being a fantasy relevant potential option, especially in the absence of Alvin Kamara. This offense not really having too many threats surrounding Tyler Shough. Him still being fantasy relevant is nice to see, and as they take on the Buccaneers this week, a defense that's allowed 2+ passing touchdowns in each of the last 4 games, you would believe that Tyler Shough could have an opportunity of being fantasy relevant, especially for those of you who are playing in a 2 quarterback format or incredibly desperate for a backup in the absence of Drake May, Brock Purdy, and or of course Jackson Dart. Then we close out with CJ Stroud, rostered in a higher percentage than both Tyrod and Shough combined at 38%. But the reality of the situation is they are taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. And even though this most recent game was a solid win for the Houston Texans as they're continuing to streak together victories, ultimately, I think what is most appealing about CJ Stroud is his fantasy playoff schedule, taking on Arizona, Las Vegas, and the Los Angeles Chargers. But that being said, the Chiefs have been solid. They've allowed 2+ touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks in each of the last 3 games. So you can assume that CJ Stroud could be of value within the upcoming matchup. Let's close out with the kicker and defensive conversations, beginning with Evan McPherson. Don't know why he's still only rostered in 27% of leagues, but he should be picked up. Since week 7, he's the number 2 kicker in fantasy and number 2 in terms of fantasy points per game on average. And in the return of Joe Burrow, will continue to be at the top of that conversation. Then we have Riley Patterson, who has been one of the best kickers low-key over the course of the last 5 games, putting up 10, 8, 7, 14, and 11 fantasy points. And in 4 of those 5 games, yes, they have been victorious, which has been the biggest difference maker. This season, when the Dolphins have found themselves winning games, he's averaging 10.2 fantasy points per game. Expect for another victory this week against the New York Jets defense. Then we close out with Jake Moody. Over the course of his last 3 career games, 10 of 11 on field goals. And with Jayden Daniels potentially returning for the Washington Commanders, that could mean even more field goals and scoring. Taking on Minnesota this week in an indoor stadium, there is an expectation, regardless of who plays quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, that the Washington Commanders will find themselves victorious and finding themselves scoring a lot of points and hopefully some field goals being implicated. Then we move on to the defensive conversation. I only wanted to mention 2 defenses. The Miami Dolphins rostered in 19% of leagues, coming off of 10, 8, 15, 1, and 7 fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games. Of course, they have had 7 or more fantasy points when they have been victorious. And thus far this season, when they are winning games, they're averaging 10 fantasy points per game. A solid play this week against the Jets. Then we have Tampa Bay, who, again, outside of their fantasy playoff schedule that is going to be relatively advantageous, taking on Atlanta, Carolina, and Miami. This week, they take on New Orleans, who earlier this season, back in week 8 against New Orleans, put up 28 fantasy points. But as of late, outside of the 3 most incredibly difficult matchups, taking on the LA Rams, Buffalo Bills, New England Patriots, incredible teams across the board, all Super Bowl contenders this season, when they've taken on San Francisco, Detroit, New Orleans, and Arizona, they've been decent. 12, 9, 28, 8 fantasy points against solid offenses. So even up against New Orleans this week, expected to be a fantastic pickup and play for not only this week, but for hopefully the remainder of the season for our fantasy rosters. Okay, before we go ahead and put together some plays via Betr, quick reminder for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings every single Thursday and Sunday, you can go ahead and check out the Patreon. Of course, you can ask me any and all fantasy football related questions. I'm there to help. So if you guys are not interested in potentially swinging by one of the upcoming live streams, as we live stream 6 days out of the week, you can go ahead and check out the Patreon. That is greatly appreciated. But outside of that, let's go ahead and put together some plays in regards to tonight's Monday Night Football matchup. Let's check that out right now. So going into tonight, first and foremost, what caught my eye was TreVeyon Henderson had a number of 41.5 rushing and receiving yards. That's an automatic potential discounted play that I'm going to go in the direction of. We're taking more on that, obviously. So we're looking to potentially pair that up with other plays that hopefully are going to end up hitting. Therefore, we're looking in the direction of more than 3.5 receptions from the likes of Theo Johnson. Has he been able to accomplish accomplished that lately? No, but he's on the cusp. And recently, when we talk about the overall success of tight ends against the New England Patriots, they've recently allowed 7 grabs for 53 against Cincinnati, 8 for 53 against the Jets, and 10 for 99 against Cleveland. They have allowed many of receptions to opposing tight ends, and as their number 1 receiving option down in the red zone for Jackson Dart, and hopefully with the potential of Wan'Dale Robinson obviously getting his 10 plus targets, majority of the other looks are going to go in the direction of Theo Johnson, so we'll take him more on 3.5 receptions. Then, speaking of Jackson Dart, I like the potential of him continuing to run the football. I understand that over the course of this season, he's been able to go more than 50-plus rushing yards in 5 of the last 7 games, so him currently sitting at a 25.5 point total, I'm going to assume that a quarterback of this age, I understand that they want him to run the ball less. He's coming off the concussion protocol, having missed each of the last 2 games, but he's a runner. And that is going to be what he does his entire career. And he's not going to avoid it. He is not going to lean away from it. Expect him to go ahead and accomplish more than 25.5 rushing yards. 3 plays for a potential 6x multiplier. Then if we look towards other potential plays, I was looking in the direction of players like a Wan'Dale Robinson. But when I saw the potential number of receptions that were being implicated for guys like Kayshon Boutte and Mac Hollins, it was quite surprising. You can theoretically get Kayshon Boutte at this moment. Where's his number at? I mean, Boutte is at 1.5 receptions, so is Mac Hollins. Mac Hollins has had 2 or more receptions in 6 of the last 6 games, and Kayshon Boutte has had 2 receptions in 5 of the last 5 healthy games. Both these potential plays, I mean, theoretically, if you add it to this number, it's an 8x multiplier, but as of right now, those are 2 extra plays that I'd be very much so interested in. But that's going to be the plays for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Like I've mentioned before, for those of you guys who want to go ahead and take advantage of it, use code AGE today to sign up, get that free $10, get the free plays, get the discounted plays, and take advantage of the opportunity, because not only will you be able to get those rankings, the plays, but you'll also support the channel. Thank you very much, everybody, and I'll be back later tonight, live streaming on the channel. Until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.